Everybody's favorite daily game Wordle is about to hit a milestone. 1,000 Wordles! The 1,000th Wordle will be coming out this Friday. Yay! And how are they choosing to celebrate it? Well, by stamping out free expression and creativity with strict legal action. Yay! The owner of Worlde, the New York Times, has just issued a DMCA to nearly 2,000 websites that were inspired by Wordle. Happy anniversary! And they want to do that even though many of these 2,000 websites are distinct enough from Wordle that this DMCA saying that they are clones rings a little bit hollow, including many of them that are the Wordle in other languages, which is currently only offered in English. And they want to do this despite the fact that Wordle, in its concept and current implementation, is basically just either a carbon copy or heavily inspired by two older games. But how do we get to the point where a newspaper company is threatening to sue the people who made Australian Wordle? In this video, I want to examine the basis from which Wordle and the New York Times are demanding these 2,000 websites be shut down. I'm also going to get into the history as to why Wordle and the most recent game Connections have risen so rapidly in what is ostensibly a newspaper company, as well as the fundamental hypocrisy of trying to shut down so-called knockoff websites when both Wordle and Connections have heavily borrowed from other existing games. Really quickly though, please subscribe. 97% of you are not subscribed. The more subscribers I have, the easier it is for me to grow the channel. If you like my content, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much. Heart. Wordle was originally made by a man named Josh Wardle, and he originally made this game just for his partner and him to enjoy, as well as some members of their extended family. The full version came out in 2021, but didn't really see any publicity until November 2021, and then 2 months later, millions of people were using it. The name of the game Wordle comes from word plus Wardle, which is just funny to me because that happened to be his last name. There are so many games that are just now -le. Makes me glad the Royals didn't come up with this game, lest we be stuck with the daily Mountbatten Wordzer. Come on. It was bad, okay? It wasn't that bad. Hey, don't boo me. I haven't kidnapped any princesses, unlike some of us here. Now, Wordle probably found more success than it might have otherwise had in a normal time because it came out in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, or if you live in Arizona, 1 year after the pandemic ended. But fundamentally, I think it was always going to be successful because at our core, I think humans really love to play silly little games. We're kind of like rats who need to run through a maze to get a little piece of cheese. Except in this case, the maze is guessing a 5-letter word in 6 attempts, and the cheese is intellectual satisfaction. Or a smug sense of superiority which you can flex in group chats or on Twitter. Because, as we all know, if you can't get the Wordle, you have failed as a human being. The website had basically gone viral into December and January, and by the end of January it was announced that the New York Times was buying Wordle for an undisclosed 7-figure sum. That same New York Times, which was then probably better known for covering the news, but is now better known for spelling bees and colored tiles. And in retrospect, the amount of money they paid for an idea that was as successful as Wordle was probably a bit of an underpayment, but given Wardle described this period of his life as miserable, I think he probably made the right choice to cash out. So to make $2 to $3 million when you were expecting to make 0 is probably a pretty good deal. Yeah, making $2 to $3 million when you expect to make nothing is pretty fun. I mean, that'd be like if I made $2 to $3 million when I filed my taxes. In fact, I usually have to pay after I file my taxes because of something called tax fraud, whatever that means. Some people were initially hesitant that it didn't even take 3 months for a big corporation to swoop in and buy something that people were enjoying, but people kind of got over it and kept playing the Wordle. But I feel like we're still missing a big part of the story as to how the New York Times, a newspaper, suddenly became a video game developer and publisher. For many decades, the only part of the games section in the New York Times was the New York Times Daily Crossword. The Daily Crossword came out in 1942, which makes sense, because only in the midst of World War II could answering questions like went in a circuitous way and sound of distant musketry ever be considered to be a fun way to spend the time. Eventually, though, before they purchased Wordle, they started innovating with the New York Times Daily Mini, a mini version of the crossword, and the Spelling Bee, where people spell words with letters, not super complex. Shortly before they ended up purchasing Wordle, they had rebranded their New York Times crossword app to the New York Times Games app, and users were up 40% in 2020. And things have just kept escalating from there. After purchasing Wordle in 2022, hot Wordle summer, as they put it, really began in earnest. Celebrities and other public figures became obsessed with doing the Wordle, but here's the thing. I don't think Wordle rises, at least not to the extent that it has, without other Wordle-inspired games. Nerdle for math, Worlde for geography, Hurdle for music, and this one is kind of stretching at our ability to make word-based puns, Taylordle for Taylor Swift. And while these sites are not targeted as part of the New York Times' DMCA complaint, a lot of other very similar games are. It's important to note that when Wordle was started by Wardle, that's always going to get me sorry, when it started it was an open source software. Wordle was something that was meant to be expanded on and built upon by other people. And the New York Times is now trying to get rid of a lot of websites and games that were inspired by the original. And many of them aren't even offering the same thing as the Wordle. The biggest example for these are foreign language versions, which, by the way, Wordle, again, is only offered in English. One person who's operating a version of Wordle in the Yoruba language took to social media to blast the decision. And they're right! I don't think the New York Times is exactly lining up to hire someone to get the Yoruba Wordle out there. I think they're probably focused on the English one, which is why it's important for these websites to exist. They've also gone so far as to extend their takedown request to a parody version where the answer every day is chunk. And yes, there are some versions of Wordle that are basically direct clones, but that raises another question. To what extent is Wordle actually a unique entity? Because if you didn't know this, Wordle is very, very similar to a game called Giotto, and is very, very, very similar, bordering on a clone of a game called Lingo. In Giotto, two people take turns trying to guess the 5-letter word picked by the other person, and after each guess they get a number of how many letters are in the correct spot. And Lingo is an old reality show that has now since been rebooted that literally looks like this. Look, all art is a product of inspiration, and none of it can ever be claimed to be entirely 100% original. You are, after all, watching a video essay of me talking to you in front of my desk about a topic with graphics. Which is precisely why what the New York Times is doing with this takedown request is ridiculous. Wordle is as much a product of the games that came before it as the games that have come after it are a product of Wordle. And again, Worlde probably wouldn't be as popular as it is now without the rise of other similar websites that cater to different needs. Because I don't even do the Wordle. I do the Framed, which is 6 frames from a movie. Guess the movie. Very, very fun if you like movies. I do the Traveler, get to 2 different countries with other countries in between them. The Flagla, guessing the flag. And the Worldle. The Worldle. The Worldle. Which has a fun name that's hard to say, and people often think I've said the Wordle. Because I'll be talking to a person, I'll be like, yeah, I like doing the Worldle. And they'll be like, oh my god, yeah, today was so hard, it was guano. Like, what even is that? I'm like, oh buddy, for me it was Cambodia, you gotta level up. And although I do all of these things, the one thing I do not get is bitches. But I do get the New York Times' newest game that is related to the Wordle, which is Connections. The editor of Connections, Wina Liu, was hired after she met some of the people from the New York Times on a crossword-themed cruise. That's a real thing, by the way. In fact, that was actually the original theme of the Titanic. It was a crossword-themed transatlantic cruise. The captain was actually stuck on a particularly difficult Friday crossword when he wasn't paying attention, then the ship hits the iceberg, and he doomed 1,517 souls, including his own. And since Connections premiered in last June, it has taken the internet by storm, probably most notably for its incredible fluctuations in difficulty from day to day. Compare the categories from the first ever Connections, featuring things like NBA teams and palindromes and precipitation, to this category, which went viral on Twitter, colors with the first letter changed, as well as the infamous Connections number 253, which featured Match, Hinge, Bumble, and Tinder, all naturally fitting into a group of 4 as dating apps, except no, they actually aren't, because Match and Tinder are fire-making materials, Hinge is a part of a door, and Bumble is a word that can also mean to mess something up. But confusing connections, including a connection that is seemingly valid but actually isn't what the author intended, is all part of the puzzle-solving process. And this may come as a shock to you to learn that Connections was also heavily inspired, if not taken directly from, a similar game that exists on TV in the United Kingdom called Only Connect. I know that the fact that the New York Times Games Department may have heavily borrowed from another game may come as quite a large shock. Only Connect has a part of the show with something called a connecting wall that features 16 words and 4 categories. Is this starting to sound familiar? Maybe a little bit. Now, the New York Times Games Department is met with a very interesting set of pressures. They have to realize that they are both a group of people who love puzzles and games, as well as probably one of the only reasons why the New York Times is making any money at all. In the past year, their daily users have nearly tripled to about 3 million every single day, and that's daily, with 28 million people having used the app to play at least one game. And many of these people using the app are going to be funneled to the full, complete New York Times subscription package, which costs $50 a year and gives you access to both the games as well as the news. You know, the thing that the New York Times kind of got their reputation for initially. So when the New York Times as an organization has their legal department send a very scary sounding letter to 2,000 websites that are based off of the Wordle but are inspired by the Wordle and are different, and many of them are just the Wordle in different languages, which you don't even offer anyway, and your own initial concept was heavily inspired by other games, it's all very absurd. Now look, I get it. They paid $2 to $3 million to buy Wordle from Worlde. That's still funny to me. I'm sorry. And because they're a newspaper company in a time when America has basically destroyed most newspapers, that was probably a lot of money for them and they want to protect their investment. I get it. But their legal claim arguing what exactly they own from copyright that these websites are violating is a little absurd. They claim that they own, quote, the 5x6 grid and, quote, green tiles to indicate correct guesses. They argue that those are copyrighted parts of Wordle, which is crazy because, hey, I feel like somebody could probably sue you for a couple similarities you have to a couple games that already exist. And given that, they still have the nerve to argue they have copyright jurisdiction over the color green. I know this piece has maybe come off as a little bit harsh. I'm all for newspapers trying to survive in a digital ecosystem where basically nobody gives a shit and we're all headed for a metaphorical cliff. Newspapers and journalists are essential to the content that I make on this channel. Now, not the New York Times because they're paywalled and I'm too broke to afford it, but you know what I mean. But as we near the 1000th anniversary of Worlde, instead of celebrating this awesome experience that challenges us and makes us think and offers a collective experience in the time when there are very few of those left, instead of honoring and celebrating all that, they're going after websites that were inspired by Wordle, which is not unlike how Wordle itself is inspired by Giotto and Lingo. The very idea of Wordle is heavily borrowed, or if you want to be meaner, completely copied. So, in the spirit of what the New York Times has done, I'm announcing today that I am taking legal action. I am following a DMCA on several notable YouTube creators. Cody Ko, ContraPoints, Drew Gooden, H Bomber Guy, and others, and also including JJ McCullough, sorry, yes, even him, who's been so supportive to me with his comments on the channel. Unfortunately, I have to issue you all a DMCA, because I'm afraid that all of you are infringing on my copyright as a YouTube channel. This includes, but is not limited to, talking in front of a camera and making a video about a current event or interesting subject. I'm sure you'll all understand and will realize that taking down your channels is really the best thing you can do to honor my copyright. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it. Lets YouTube know I'm doing a good job. And leave a comment if you agree, disagree with me. Is New York Times going over the line, or are they doing what's necessary to protect their copyright? And are the games themselves, are they rip-offs from those games I was talking about, or am I completely off base with that? But yeah. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. And as always, my name is Patrick, but my friends call you Pat, and I'll see you for the next one.